Today in the bunker, we're going to build a bunker. Today's build is a hardened aircraft bunker, specifically built in the Soviet style. A lot of these all over the former Soviet Union. This one is going to see some action in the zone. Going to have some aircraft that'll go in there, or possibly some bandits or whatever. This one is for a 20mm scale build, but you could make it different sizes, and this bunker itself, as it sits, would work fine with 28mm figures. It would just not be really for aircraft, because a little small there. But it's a fairly easy build, so let's get stuck in. For the basic assembly, we're going to use half of a piece of 6-inch plastic drain pipe. This cuts fairly easily. It's got a seam on both sides. And what I did was I took a razor knife, in this case an ALFA, and cut the top of each of these ribs along that seam first, and then started to cut down through it. So you kind of cut what would then be the top of the inside rib as you go. And take your time. You could easily lose a finger. This thing will grab your blade and twist it. So go slow. The base of it is a piece of mat board and some random sprue. It's just mat board that I have treated with a sanding sealer and sealed it so that it's moisture proof. You could use chipboard and do the same thing. Probably a couple of coats of paint would achieve the same thing on chipboard. I just prefer to use this because it's kind of humid where I live, so this sort of protects it. Plus, when I glue things to it, it helps prevent warping. So just use whatever material you have. You can make it work. If you have something that warps, if you've only glued one side, then put glue on the other side and let it dry, and that'll pull it back flat, or nearly so. Usually it's enough you can bend it down and it'll be fine. So I've taken the plastic pipe, I've just put a little bit of gray primer on it, and done the same thing here. I primed this black and then hit it with gray, kind of splotchy gray, to sort of simulate concrete. And I've marked out where this is going to go on here, and it's going to be offset a little, and you'll see why in the next few steps. We're going to have an entrance on this side, so I want to leave a little room for that. This is all straight sided. I just rounded the curves. I laid a bottle cap on there and traced around it, and then just cut that line. It doesn't have to be super precise. Just something to sort of take away the kind of machine look of it. You want it to look a little more natural. So I'm going to, in order to simulate the concrete, I'm going to draw some dividing lines on here, and we'll probably accentuate those with some knife cuts. The Soviets seemed to rarely pour a huge slab of concrete. It was always sort of rectangles. As I am wont to do, went a little bit out of order on the steps. I figured that I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to glue this down before I do the rest of it or not, but I wanted to be able to finish the inside no matter which way I went. So I went ahead and on the scoring, I made a stencil that fit just inside there, and then just took some gray spray paint and misted it from about, well, if I hit the camera, about a foot or so, maybe a little farther, just enough to kind of build up a highlight, and it's not very consistent, so it's very much like aged concrete. And once that was done, then I came back along the scored lines and put some black wash just to give it a little bit of visual separation. I think it worked pretty well. So even when that bunker is all together, you'll still be able to kind of see down in there. Not very well on camera, I'm guessing. There we go. You'll still be able to see it. And of course at the back you really won't be able to, but like I said, if you made a one that came off, then that would look great all the way down. So whatever way you want to do that, there's no wrong way, just that's how I'm doing this, and I'm just going to babble on because that's what I do. To secure this to the base, I just used hot glue, and I just went along and just did a dab on each of the outside ribs, and then did the other side, and then came back and did the inside ribs, and that made it pretty sturdy. It's not coming off of there very easily. So once we glue some other pieces to it, that'll firm it up to where this thing will be pretty indestructible. The only thing I wish I had done is measured a little better. This is slightly off center because I had to move this over. There's going to be like a concrete lip on the outside, and I hadn't left sufficient room for that. But that's kind of a minor thing. So once the jet's in there and the doors are on, won't really notice it anyway. After a bit of cutting, I made a bunch of strips that are about, I guess, 5-6 millimeters, or I guess they're a centimeter thick, and a couple of centimeters high. And the plan is, I'm going to glue them, and of course trim them to fit, but I'll kind of glue them around the body of the arch, and then we can fill that in with some filler and give it a good earth texture. And for the front, I made the reinforced concrete arch, which I didn't cut as well as I might have hoped, but we can fix that. Not a huge insurmountable problem. And the lines on this, I just used a ruler and a pen. I just did that typical, just mark it on the foam, and that gives it a nice dividing line. So when we texture that and paint it, we'll have those dividing lines in there, and we can use that for weathering. Just to illustrate how I'm gluing on these pieces, just take the hot glue and just put a dab on each of these ribs. Then take our piece of our strip that we've already got, push that on there. All right, just trim that to fit. I've actually trimmed most of these before I stuck them on. That's a little easier, but pretty straightforward. All right, now that all the outside pieces are glued on, all that superstructure, I'm going to go back and smooth it out with some wood filler. You could use spackle, wood filler, just about anything you got. Glue and some sand maybe. You could pack those just to smooth it out, and we'll get that ready to get some paint on it. Also, that end piece for the other end, I went ahead and painted now because that's going to get glued on, and I won't be able to get in there to paint it. So I just used gray craft paint, painted it like concrete. So we will go ahead and get some of that on there and see what it does. All right, to use this, I just got a plastic palette knife. You could use just about anything. You pick it up with your fingers if you wanted to. This stuff's a little more rigid than like wall filler, but it's the same idea. Just kind of smooth it into whatever space you want it to fill. And then once it dries, we'll go back and sand it so that it's smoothed out to our liking. And it'll change color. This particular stuff changes from pink to like kind of a tan color. So we'll know when it's all dry. It doesn't take too awful long to get all of the gaps filled. As you can see, it's already starting to dry, that tan color. So we'll let that sit for a bit. I also did the front to kind of blend that in a little better where I had that hot glue. That was kind of a messy cut, so we'll fix it in post, as they say in the filmmaking world. And we're going to go ahead and let that dry a bit. I will glue the back on, glue on some supports. We'll get the back part ready to do because it's going to slope. And then we'll get ready to go ahead and start texturing this. The entire thing seems to be dry. Let's all turn that tan color. I added a small entrance door. I happen to have a 3D printed door. I think this is one of the miscast set. That seems to work pretty well. and for 20mm stuff, that's just about the perfect size. So I'm going to prime what's going to be concrete. I've textured it with the tinfoil ball. I'm going to prime that, and then we will put some paint on it, and then we're going to use some texture paint to lay down the ground on this, or the earth that's over this bunker, and then we'll put some static grass on top of that. The texture paint I was going to use did not work out the way I wanted, so I went back to the standby of just putting on some PVA glue and sprinkling sand on it, and then we'll paint over that once that's dry. I was trying to save a step, it did not work. While I'm waiting for the sand and glue to dry, I went ahead and put a base coat on the concrete parts. That'll get followed up with a dark wash and some dry brushing of a much lighter gray, maybe even some white, just to accentuate the weathered nature of that concrete. And then once that is dry, then we'll apply some various shades of brown and whatnot to that sand and get that ready to put the grass on. Now that this is dried quite nicely, a few little errant pieces on there, I'm going to take some thinned out brown craft paint, and we're going to apply some color to this wherever it's not concrete. We will put that on there. I may add a little bit of alcohol as a flow aid, but we'll get that applied. Once that initial coat of dark brown dried, I went back and overbrushed it with some nutmeg and then some maple sugar tan, just to kind of give it some highlight. We're going to put some static grass on this, but in case there's some patches where it doesn't show through, it'll just look like dirt underneath. It won't just look like, painted foam. It'll look like, hopefully, dirt. To give it a more earth-like appearance, I put some flocking on here, and I'm using a mix of medium green and harvest gold, and the two together make pretty convincing green, multicolored green. Most grass, especially in the wild that's not your lawn, often has several different colors in it. I wish I had a static grass applicator so it would stand up a little more, but that's fine. We'll work with it as is. So we're going to just try to cover this whole thing and not leave any huge patches. You'll see some little spots. That's fine. The way I'm doing this is just putting down little dots of PVA, and then I'm just taking the flocking and just kind of pushing it down into it. And it doesn't make it stand up, but it does stick it, and that's fine. And I always do this over a paper plate so we can kind of shake off the excess and catch that. A couple of notes about doing the flock. You don't have to use these particular colors. Use whatever colors you've been using for your basing. If you only have one color, work with that. That's fine. But multiple colors generally makes it a little better. The other thing is don't do it like I'm doing here, where I'm sort of freeballing this. Be sure to put down a paper towel or a piece of plastic or something, because this stuff gets everywhere. It makes a horrible mess, worse than the sand. After covering pretty much all of it with flocking, I went back and added some random tufts. I had various colors, so I used them. If you only have one, use one, but if you have multiples, use multiples where applicable, just to kind of break up the monotony of that, even that multicolored green. It's kind of a big expanse of it. So you see we've got some little exposed earth. We've got our tufts, so it gives it a very naturalistic appearance. I also went and did a couple of dry brushes on the concrete. I used a darker gray, a medium gray, and then a white, and that really brought that out. I may go back and put some pin washes in here and there as stains, but that's pretty much ready to go. So the only thing left are going to be the doors, which I cut out of foam and then scored with a pen, because they're made, the real ones are a hollow metal, like a shell. There's metal panels on it. I believe they're welded in place. And these ride on a set of rails in front of the bunker, which I did not build. We'll just have to use our imagination. But they've got like a wheeled piece that comes out here for stabilization, and it just goes back and forth. There are kinds that hinge. These are going to be the kind that go that way. So we're going to put some Mod Podge on these to firm them up, and then we'll get to painting them. Right, so after I put the Mod Podge on there to firm it up, I took the nutmeg brown and stippled that on to build up a texture, and then sponged on some Russian protective green, which is a particular Cold War color I happened to buy, but just use whatever olive drab or kind of greeny color fits. It doesn't have to be super specific. It fades really bad in the sunlight anyway, so and then I put on some raw sienna. I sponged that on lightly and gave it a very rusty, worn texture. And there it is, our Cold War aircraft bunker, now with action cam. If I could hit the lights, that'd be great. But you can have it with the doors open, the doors closed, whatever suits. I've got a MiG that I'm going to try to finish to build, and then it can live in there, or whatever, vehicles, bad guys, monsters, whatever you want. And then, of course, there's a personnel door on the side, but a useful piece of terrain. I'm going to build part of an airfield for the zone, so this is going to see some action. But not a hard build, just took a little bit waiting for things to dry. The hardest part was getting that pipe. I had to wait a couple of weeks for that to come in. But you could use cardboard or whatever. You don't have to use that corrugated pipe, especially if you're doing something in 28mm. You probably have to. I don't know if they make a plastic corrugated pipe big enough. Since I'm doing this in 20mm, the 6-inch pipe seems to work pretty well. It's just the right size for a MiG. So anyway, I hope this was enjoyable. I hope you learned something. I hope that this inspires you to make something fantastic, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.